My husband paid 50 million naira for me at a spiritual auction, and I wasn't even human. My name is Adaeze, and I am what the living call a mamiwata, a water spirit bound to the physical world through dark rituals and blood money. For 3 years, I lived as the perfect wife to billionaire oil tycoon Chukwuemeka Okonkwo, the richest man in Lagos. He thought he had bought himself the ultimate status symbol, a supernatural bride more beautiful than any mortal woman, one who would bring him unlimited wealth and power. What he didn't know was that spirits like me don't belong to anyone, and the price for trying to own what should never be possessed is always paid in blood. This is the story of how a man's greed led him to purchase something he could never truly have, how I became trapped between two worlds, and what happened when the contract binding us together finally came due. But to understand how it all went so terribly wrong, you need to know how Chukwuemeka Okonkwo became desperate enough to buy a wife from the spirit realm. Chukwuemeka Okonkwo didn't start as a billionaire. He was born in a small village in Anambra State, the youngest son of a struggling palm wine tapper. While his brothers inherited their father's modest trade, Chukwuemeka had bigger dreams. He was brilliant, ambitious, and willing to do whatever it took to escape poverty. He won scholarships, worked 3 jobs while studying petroleum engineering at the University of Lagos, and eventually landed a position with an international oil company. But being smart and hardworking wasn't enough for Chukwuemeka. He watched as less qualified men with the right family connections, the right tribal affiliations, the right spiritual backing, climbed higher and faster than he ever could. That's when he started seeking other forms of assistance. First, it was harmless enough, a visit to a local babalawo for good luck charms before important business meetings, offerings to his ancestors for protection and prosperity, small spiritual investments that many successful Nigerians make without thinking twice. But as his ambition grew, so did his spiritual appetite. By age 35, Chukwuemeka had built a modest fortune through a combination of hard work, strategic networking, and increasingly dark spiritual assistance. He had learned that in the world of Nigerian mega wealth, there was the money you earned, and then there was the money that came through other means. His business rivals whispered that his success wasn't natural. Companies that competed against his oil importation business would mysteriously lose contracts at the last moment. Executives who stood in his way would fall ill with strange ailments that doctors couldn't diagnose. Ships carrying his competitors' petroleum products would experience inexplicable mechanical failures. Chukwuemeka always had an alibi, always had a rational explanation, but those who knew, truly knew, understood that his wealth had roots that went deeper than business acumen, roots that extended into the spiritual realm, where deals are made in blood and darkness. By 40, he was a billionaire. He had the mansion in Banana Island, the private jets, the fleet of luxury cars, the political connections that money could buy. But he was missing something that all his wealth couldn't acquire: a wife. Not just any wife. Chukwuemeka had dated countless women, models, actresses, socialites, educated professionals, but none of them satisfied him. They wanted his money, yes, but they also wanted things from him: attention, emotional connection, fidelity, love. He didn't have time for such mortal complications. What he wanted was a wife who would be perpetually beautiful, unfailingly obedient, and who would enhance his wealth and status without demanding anything emotional in return. What he wanted, in essence, was a possession, not a partner. That's when his most trusted spiritual consultant, a powerful native doctor, known only as Baba Ogun, told him about the secret auction. The meeting happened in Baba Ogun's shrine, a compound deep in the forests of Osun State, far from the prying eyes of modern Nigeria. Chukwuemeka had driven there himself in an unmarked SUV, telling no one where he was going. Baba Ogun was not like the flashy miracle workers who advertised on Instagram and preached in mega churches. He was old school, practicing the ancient traditions that predated Christianity and Islam in Nigeria. His shrine was decorated with animal skulls, traditional masks, and artifacts that seemed to pulse with their own energy. The old man studied Chukwuemeka with eyes that had seen too much of human darkness. "You want a wife that ordinary money cannot buy," Baba Ogun said in Igbo. "You want beauty that never fades, loyalty that cannot be broken, and fortune that flows like the Niger River." "Yes," Chukwuemeka replied, without hesitation. "I want the best. I don't care what it costs." Baba Ogun was silent for a long moment before responding. "There is a way, but it requires you to enter a world that most men are too afraid to approach. A world where spirits and humans conduct business that the ordinary world must never know about." "I'm listening." "Once every 7 years, there is an auction. It happens in the spiritual realm, at the boundary between the world of the living and the realm of water spirits. There, men of great wealth can bid for spirit wives, supernatural beings who will take human form and bind themselves to their purchaser through unbreakable contracts." Chukwuemeka leaned forward, intrigued. "Spirit wives, like Mami Wata?" "Yes, but understand this. These are not simple good luck charms or spiritual enhancements. These are conscious beings, ancient and powerful. When you purchase one, you are entering a contract that cannot be broken except through death, and sometimes not even then." "What's the price?" Baba Ogun smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Money is only part of it. The auction requires a deposit of 50 million naira just to attend. If you win a bid, the final price could be 10 times that amount. But money is the least of what you'll pay. You'll need to offer something more valuable, something from your essence, a piece of your soul, bound in blood and witnessed by the old gods. And you'll need to accept that what you bring home will never truly be yours, no matter what the contract says." For the first time in years, Chukwuemeka felt a flutter of fear, but his desire for the ultimate status symbol, for a wife that would make every other billionaire envious, overwhelmed his caution. "When is the next auction?" 3 days from now. The location will only be revealed at midnight. You'll need to bring the deposit in cash, and you'll need to come alone. No bodyguards, no drivers, no phones or cameras. What happens there must never be spoken of in the daylight world." Chukwuemeka agreed without another moment of hesitation. 3 days later, at exactly midnight, he found himself standing at the edge of Osun River, following spiritual coordinates that only appeared to those who had paid the price of entry. Around him in the darkness, he could sense others, wealthy men from across Africa, all drawn by the same promise of supernatural companionship. And there, rising from the mist above the water, the auction house appeared. Not a building of wood or stone, but a structure woven from moonlight and shadow, existing in the space between worlds. The auction was about to begin. I remember the night I was brought to the auction, not because I chose to be there, but because I had been captured. You see, water spirits like me, Mami Wata, are meant to exist in the rivers, lakes, and oceans, moving freely between the physical and spiritual realms. We are ancient, powerful, and answerable only to the old gods of water and nature. But there are humans who have learned how to trap us. Dark native doctors who know the rituals and sacrifices required to bind the water spirits and force them into human form. They catch us with sacred nets woven from the hair of virgins and the roots of plants that grow only at the boundary between land and water. I had been captured 3 months before the auction, along with 5 other water spirits. We were kept in special containment, large clay vessels filled with water from our home rivers, inscribed with binding symbols that prevented us from returning to full spirit form. They fed us offerings of honey, milk, and goat blood to keep us strong and beautiful. After all, we were merchandise, and merchandise must be kept in prime condition. The night of the auction, we were brought before the wealthy buyers in our human forms. Each of us appeared as breathtakingly beautiful women, because that is how water spirits manifest when we choose to interact with humans. But our beauty was cold, otherworldly, something that stirred desire, mixed with primal fear. I stood on the auction platform, draped in white fabric that shimmered like scales, my skin gleaming with an unnatural luminescence. My hair fell to my waist in waves that moved as if underwater, even in still air. I could see the men in the audience, wealthy beyond measure, powerful beyond question, and foolish beyond comprehension. They looked at us with hunger, seeing not beings with our own will and power, but possessions to be owned. That's when I first saw him. Chukwuemeka Okonkwo, sitting in the front row, his eyes fixed on me with an intensity that made even my immortal spirit feel uneasy. The auctioneer, an entity that was neither fully human nor fully spirit, began the bidding. This one is called Adaeze, Queen of the Waters. She has lived for 300 years in the rivers of the Igbo land. She brings prosperity, beauty, and mystical power to whoever claims her. Opening bid, 50 million naira. Hands shot up around the room. 70 million, 90 million, 150 million. But Chukwuemeka's hand remained raised through every bid, his expression calm and determined. He had not come to lose. When the bidding reached 300 million naira, most bidders dropped out. Only two remained, Chukwuemeka and an elderly Yoruba chief who owned half the real estate in Lagos. 350 million, the chief called out. 400 million, Chukwuemeka responded immediately. The chief hesitated, studying Chukwuemeka's unwavering face, then slowly lowered his hand. Some instinct told him not to compete with a man whose hunger was this consuming. Sold, the auctioneer declared, to the Igbo billionaire for 400 million naira. As binding chains materialized around my wrists, spiritual bonds that would tether me to my new owner, I looked directly at Chukwuemeka and spoke my first words to him. You have purchased my presence, but you will never own my heart. Remember that when the contract comes due. He smiled, confident and arrogant. I own everything I pay for. How wrong he was. Life as Chukwuemeka's spiritual wife began the next day. He brought me to his massive mansion in Banana Island. 30 rooms of marble floors, gold fixtures, and luxury that most Nigerians could never imagine. He had a wedding ceremony, arranged within a week, a small, private affair, with only his most trusted associates present. No family, because he didn't want to explain where his new bride had come from. No press, because his acquisition was not the kind of thing one publicized. To the world, I became Adaeze Okonkwo, a mysterious beauty from a wealthy Eastern family, educated abroad, now married to one of Nigeria's most eligible billionaires. The first few months were deceptively easy. As part of the spiritual contract, I was bound to maintain human form and play the role of devoted wife. I attended his business dinners, smiled for photographs at charity events, and grazed his arm at political fundraisers. Everywhere we went, people stared. Women envied me. Men desired me. Business partners treated Chukwuemeka with even more respect when they saw the supernatural beauty he had claimed as his own. And his wealth, it exploded. Every business deal he touched turned to gold. His oil shipments arrived without incident. His investments tripled in value. Competitors seemed to lose their will to fight him, as if some invisible force was clearing his path to even greater success. He was thrilled. He had gotten exactly what he paid for, a wife who enhanced his status and multiplied his fortune without making any emotional demands. But he didn't understand the true nature of what he had brought into his home. Water spirits are not meant for captivity. The binding contract kept me in human form and prevented me from physically leaving his property without permission, but it couldn't change my essential nature. I was still a being of water, an ancient power, trapped in flesh and confined to land. Every day was agony. I could feel the rivers calling to me, the ocean singing songs I couldn't answer. At night, I would fill the master bathroom's enormous tub and submerge myself for hours, trying to remember what freedom felt like. Chukwuemeka noticed nothing. To him, I was performing exactly as purchased. But the house staff noticed. They whispered about how the plants would wilt when I walked past, how electronics malfunctioned in my presence, how the swimming pool's water would become turbulent when I was upset. even when there was no wind. They noticed that I cast no reflection in mirrors during the full moon. They noticed that small puddles of water appeared wherever I had been standing, even on dry days. They noticed that fish in the decorative pond would gather at the surface whenever I walked nearby, as if paying homage to something they recognized. The servants began to fear me, making protective signs when I passed. The chef would leave offerings of fruit and honey at the kitchen shrine, praying for protection. The security guards would find excuses to avoid being alone with me. But what truly began to unravel everything was when Chukwuemeka's business rivals started dying, not obviously, not in ways that could be traced back to us, but dying nonetheless. A competitor who had tried to outbid him on a major contract drowned in his own swimming pool. A man who had been a champion swimmer. A government official who had demanded larger bribes was found dead in his bathtub, his lungs filled with water even though his head had been above the surface. A business partner who had attempted to embezzle from their joint venture was discovered in his car at the bottom of a river, even though witnesses swore they had seen him driving on a dry highway, miles from any water. I wasn't directly causing these deaths, but my presence, my nature as a water spirit, was creating an aura of danger around anyone who threatened what I was bound to protect. The contract interpreted any threat to Chukwuemeka as something I must defend against, and water spirits defend in only one way. Chukwuemeka, of course, was delighted. His enemies were removing themselves without him having to lift a finger. He saw it as proof that his investment had been wise. He didn't see that the same power protecting him was also beginning to consume his humanity. Everything changed the night Chukwuemeka found me crying. It was 3 months into our arrangement. He came home late from a business meeting, bypassing the master bedroom to check on me in my private room. The room he had designed to look like an underwater grotto, with walls painted in blues and greens, thinking it would please me. He found me sitting on the floor, surrounded by puddles of water that had materialized from my tears. My human form was flickering, revealing glimpses of my true nature: scaled skin, eyes like deep ocean trenches, hair that moved like seaweed in an invisible current. For the first time since purchasing me, he saw me not as a possession, but as a being in genuine pain. "Ada," his voice was uncertain. "What's wrong?" I looked up at him, too exhausted to maintain the perfect wife facade. "My name is not Ada, it's Adaeze. And what's wrong is that I'm dying, slowly. Every day I'm away from the water." He stood there, uncertain how to respond. Men like Chukwuemeka don't buy spiritual wives expecting to care about their feelings. "I gave you everything," he said finally. "This mansion, clothes, jewelry, anything you could want." "I want the river," I said simply. "I want to feel the current on my skin. I want to dive deep and speak with the fish and the old spirits who live in the dark places. I want to be what I am, not what you paid for me to pretend to be." For the first time, something like guilt crossed his face. The contract is killing me, slowly but surely. Water spirits aren't meant for land and buildings and human pretending. We're meant to be free. He sat down on the floor beside me, ruining his expensive Italian suit in the puddles. We sat in silence for a long moment before he spoke again. "I didn't know it would hurt you like this. Baba Ogun said you would be happy with the offering and the luxury. Baba Ogun is a human who traffics in spirits like we're commodities. What does he know of our happiness? What can I do?" And there, in his voice, I heard something I never expected: genuine concern. "Take me to the river, just for one night. Let me swim in my true form. Let me breathe water and remember who I am. The contract binds me to you, so I'll return. But please, give me this one mercy." Chukwuemeka was silent for a long time. His business mind was calculating risks, considering precedents, worrying about whether showing compassion would weaken his position. But something else, something buried deep beneath the billionaire exterior, was stirring. Maybe a memory of his own captivity and poverty, his own desperate desire for freedom when he was young and powerless. "Tomorrow night," he said finally, "I'll take you to the river, but you must promise to return. The contract ensures I'll return, I said bitterly. You don't need my promise. I'm not asking because of the contract. I'm asking because I want you to choose to come back. That night marked a shift between us. He began to see me as something more than a supernatural status symbol, and I began to see him as something more than just my captor. But compassion, once awakened, comes with consequences neither of us were prepared for. Chukwuemeka kept his word. The following night, he drove me himself to the river, the same stretch of water where I had lived freely for 3 centuries before being captured. No bodyguards, no driver, just him and me, and the moonlit water. When I touched the river, my human form dissolved immediately. My true self emerged, beautiful and terrible, powerful and free. I dove deep, welcoming the current, speaking with the river spirits who had mourned my capture. Chukwuemeka watched from the shore, and I could feel his wonder mixing with fear as he glimpsed what he had truly bound to himself. I stayed in the water for hours, and true to my word, true to the contract, I eventually returned to shore and reformed my human shape. But something had changed. The brief taste of freedom had reminded me of what I was fighting for, and seeing Chukwuemeka's willingness to give me even this small mercy had awakened something unexpected. I was beginning to care for him. Not love, not yet, but something more than hostility. He was still my captor, still the man who had purchased me like property, but he was also becoming someone capable of growth, of recognizing that what he had done was wrong. Over the following weeks, he began taking me to the river more frequently. Sometimes we would talk on the shore while I swam. He told me about his childhood poverty, his desperate climb to wealth, his fear that without constant vigilance and ruthless ambition, he would lose everything and return to nothing. I told him about the centuries I had lived, the humans I had blessed with good fortune, the sailors I had saved from drowning, and yes, the greedy men I had drowned when they tried to capture or exploit my sisters. We were beginning to understand each other, and that understanding was making the contract binding us together feel less like chains and more like something else. But the universe has rules, and one of the most important rules is this: spirits and humans are not meant to bond emotionally. When they do, it destabilizes the barriers between worlds. The first sign came when Chukwuemeka touched my hand one evening and saw a vision of my world, the deep rivers, the ancient spirits, the realm that existed beneath the surface of every body of water. The vision was so overwhelming that he collapsed, his nose bleeding, his human mind struggling to process what should remain forever incomprehensible to mortals. The second sign came when I felt his pain, physical pain from an old injury, and instinctively healed it with my power. The wound closed, but in doing so, I had created a connection deeper than the contract. Our life forces had touched. Baba Ogun appeared at the mansion the next day, uninvited and clearly disturbed. "What have you done?" he demanded of Chukwuemeka. "You were supposed to keep the spirit as a possession, not form an emotional bond with it." "Her name is Adaeze," Chukwuemeka said firmly, "and I'll treat her however I choose. I paid for her, remember." "You fool. You paid for a contract of servitude, not for emotional entanglement. When humans and spirits truly bond, the contract becomes unstable. It will seek resolution." "What does that mean?" Baba Ogun's face was grim. "It means one of two things will happen. Either the contract will break entirely, freeing her, but likely killing you in the process as payment for the broken bond. Or what? Or you'll have to make a choice that no man should ever have to make." 3 days after Baba Ogun's warning, I woke up feeling strange. My human form was more solid than usual, more real. I could smell things with human intensity, taste human food with actual pleasure, feel textures against my skin in ways I never had before. I was becoming more human, and Chukwuemeka was becoming more spirit. I could see it in him, the way his eyes sometimes reflected light, like a nocturnal animal, the way water seemed to part for him when he showered, the way he could now sense things in the spiritual realm that humans should never perceive. The contract was doing something neither of us had anticipated. Because we had begun to genuinely care for each other, it was transforming us both, trying to make us compatible. I was becoming human enough to truly love him, and he was becoming spirit enough to truly understand me. But this transformation came with a price that Baba Ogun had tried to warn us about. The night everything came to a head, I found a message written in water on our bedroom mirror. Not written by me, but by the old gods who govern contracts between spirits and humans. When human loves spirit and spirit loves human, 3 paths emerge. Choose before the full moon, or the choice will be made for you. The 3 paths were these. First path, I could return to being fully spirit, breaking the contract and regaining my freedom, but Chukwuemeka would die as payment for the bond we had formed. Second path, I could become fully human, losing all my powers and immortality, but staying with Chukwuemeka as a normal wife until natural death claimed us both. Third path, Chukwuemeka could surrender his humanity entirely and follow me into the spirit realm, becoming a water spirit himself, living forever in the rivers, but never again walking in the human world. We had 7 days to choose. 7 days before the full moon would force a resolution whether we were ready or not. And there was a fourth possibility that neither of us wanted to speak aloud. If we couldn't choose, the contract would choose for us. And contracts made in darkness rarely choose mercy. As we sat together that night, watching the moonlight on the river from our mansion's balcony, Chukwuemeka asked me the question I had been dreading. What do you want, Adaeze? If you could choose anything, what would you want? I looked at him, this man who had purchased me like property, but had grown to see me as a person. This billionaire who had everything but had never known real love until a water spirit taught him what it meant. I don't know anymore, I admitted. 3 months ago, I wanted only freedom. Now I want freedom, but I don't want to lose you to get it. He took my hand, and I could feel the spiritual energy flowing between us, growing stronger each day. Then we have 7 days to find a fourth path, one that no one has told us about, because I'm not losing you, Adaeze. Not to the contract, not to the spirits, not to anything. But what neither of us knew was that someone else was watching our growing bond with great interest. Someone who had their own plans for a billionaire who had learned to love a spirit. The wife Chukwuemeka had been engaged to before he went to the spiritual auction. A woman scorned, a woman with wealth of her own, and a woman who had just hired her own native doctor to break the contract binding me to Chukwuemeka. Not to free me, to claim him for herself, and to send me back to the auction house, where I would be sold again, to someone who wouldn't make the mistake of showing compassion. The real battle was just beginning.